So, the most anticipated episode of Game of Thrones Season 8 has aired, and it looks like it was somewhat of a disappointment. It certainly was for me, at least. This episode had been so hyped up, not just by fans, but also by HBO. We were told the episode would make the Red Wedding look like a dress rehearsal, and that many of our favourite characters wouldn't survive the night. We heard how the 82-minute episode took 55 days of night shoots to film, and how it would be the biggest battle ever filmed. As the opening credits came on, I was beside myself with excitement, but as the end credits appeared, I found myself thinking, was that it? It seems a lot of fans were also disappointed. It's become the second worst rated episode on Rotten Tomatoes, but before I start dissecting the video, I want to make one thing clear. I've no doubt that a huge amount of effort went into this episode, and I can only imagine how grueling it was for everyone involved, from the actors to the cameramen and women. I think a lot of people poured their hearts out into this episode, which makes me feel all the more conflicted over it. I don't want this video to come across as an attack on anyone in particular, and though we may be disappointed, let's remember it is just a TV show. I think this episode fails in two crucial ways: the lighting and the writing. I've got to say, the lighting was some of the worst I've ever experienced in a TV show or film. Every scene was so dark that I found myself ripped out of the immersion of the episode as I tried to figure out who was on screen and what they were doing. This was then made worse by moments where dragons would breathe fire and my eyes would lose their adjustment to the darkness, and once the fire was over I could see even less than before. For the life of me, I struggled to understand how this episode made it to air without someone pointing out how dark everything was. I did recently read an interview with Game of Thrones' cinematographer who defended the lighting and said it was a fault of their viewers' end for not properly tuning their TVs and for watching the show on iPads and computers and rooms with too much sunlight. I want to call bullshit on this, to be honest. I watched the episode in a pitch black room on a massive 4K TV and it still looked terrible. I also think it's incredibly presumptuous to blame the audience for not having their TVs rigged to the highest standards. Firstly, I've never before had to alter my TV settings to enjoy any film or TV show. And secondly, I read a lot of interesting comments to the article that pointed out HBO should have tested this episode on standard TVs rather than their high-end equipment. As I saw someone point out on Reddit, a good music producer will take a song that's been recorded in a studio and play it in a car through the radio speakers because they understand that the average listener will not be listening to the track with top-end specs. They'll hear it through headphones or from their car radio. You would think HBO would have done this for The Long Night by testing it on a regular TV. A lot of people had made this comparison, and I think it's a good one. Remember how in The Lord of the Rings the battle for Helm's Deep was fought at night, but you could still clearly see everything that was going on? That's what HBO should have gone through. Andrew Leslie, who shot the Battle of Helm's Deep, was asked by actor Sean Astin where the lighting was coming from, given that it was set during the night, and Leslie replied, the same place as the music. Perfect. In fact, HBO had even more of an advantage when it came to lighting, given that this episode was full of dragon fire, yet this still didn't help. Don't forget the Battle of Castle Black was also set during the night, but that looked fine. I really don't see any other explanation for this episode's lighting other than HBO seriously dropped the ball, and it really ruined my immersion. Anyway, let's get into dissecting the episode. It begins with Melisandre arriving. I have plenty of issues with the episodes that are worse than her appearance, but I do have to ask where she came from in such a timely manner. Last we heard she was in Volantis, yet she managed to appear in the nick of time for our heroes without getting caught by the White Walkers first. What was she doing in Volantis? Some people speculated she was going to bring like an army of Red Priestesses to help fight, but I don't know. I don't know what her trip to Volantis was for. I can accept this appearance from her, even though it is very convenient. She uses her powers to set the Arraks of the Dothraki on fire. Don't get me wrong, this looked really cool, but it then implies that the Dothraki were about to charge against the undead with regular weapons. We spent episodes seeing how the North was preparing dragonglass weapons, and yet they didn't bother to give any to the Dothraki, the first line of defence. Without Melisandre, how were the Dothraki expected to kill a single White or White Walker? What was their plan before she turned up? Several people have also pointed out that the Dothraki weren't used in the way cavalry should be. Cavalry are usually used as a quick in-and-out force that delivers quick and devastating blows to the enemy. That's how they're best used. A skilled commander would have had the Unsullied on the front lines that meets the undead, while the cavalry would deliver shock attacks from sides. Still, we see pretty quickly there are no skilled commanders in this battle, unfortunately. So the Dothraki ride into the complete unknown, along with Ghost, who is never seen again throughout the episode, though he does survive as he's in the teaser for episode 4, and they quickly get slaughtered to the last man. Only Jorah survives because, of course. I will admit that the scene itself looked amazing as the Dothraki charged, and seeing the light of their swords get extinguished one by one was creepy as fuck, but that wasn't enough to make up for the fact it was an utterly pointless charge that made no sense. For the life of me, I don't see why the Dothraki and the Unsullied weren't all positioned inside Winterfell, where they could better take on the undead. We also see a shot that reveals bafflingly that the catapults were set ahead of the Unsullied. Now, I've never been within 100 miles of a war zone, but I'm pretty sure artillery goes at the back. To be fair to the show, this strategy is quickly shown to be dumb, and the sheer number of the undead overwhelmed the Unsullied in moments. It's not hard to see why either, when the Unsullied appear to be totally disorganised in their formation. In the books and the show, the Unsullied are like Greek hoplites who are known for what was called a phalanx or a shield wall. They would form one impenetrable unit by locking their shields together with their spears pointing forwards, as was well demonstrated in the film 300. This proved incredibly effective against enemies that aren't in formation, like the undead, and can mean a small force could take on larger forces that were disorganised. The Unsullied, however, disregard the advantage their shields give them and take on a formation that makes it very easy for an enemy to rout them. Honestly, it's no wonder the undead overwhelmed the apparently elite fighting force of the Unsullied. This is also the moment that Dany and Jon decide to use the dragons, but I have to wonder why they didn't cover the Dothraki charge. A retreat is ordered so quickly that you have to wonder why they bothered having a force outside of Winterfell in the first place, and for some reason, despite being the commander of the Unsullied, Grey Worm is one of the first to run back to Winterfell, and he just watches as the bulk of the Unsullied are slaughtered defending the retreat. This is so out of character for Grey Worm, and it would have been the perfect time to show his dedication to the Unsullied by laying down his life with his troops to defend the retreat of the Northerners. But no, Grey Worm hightails it out of there. How inclined would you be to hold your ground if your commander just pissed off? During the chaos, Sam is almost killed by Whites, but is saved by Ed, who is then killed. I feel his death was a missed opportunity. Since Season 2, Ed has been extremely pessimistic about surviving, and it would have been a nice touch if he'd actually lived to the end. I wouldn't have minded his death had more of the main characters also died, but here it felt like they killed him off because they'd backed themselves into a corner by saying how epic this battle will be, and then realised how few very big characters actually died. Davos then attempts to light the fire trap that surrounds Winterfell, but due to a storm brought on by the Night King, Dany can't see him. We see several men try and light the trench with fire arrows and torches, but none of them take light. How the fuck did they not think to use the oil to douse the trench prior to the battle? They're literally fighting in the snow, but they didn't think it might be germane to douse the trench. I know they thought Dragonfire would light it, but you were telling me the plan was for Dany's dragon to breathe fire into the whole of the trench in order to light it. Surely it would be so much easier to douse the wood in oil, and then you'd only need one spark to set the whole thing ablaze. Luckily, Melisandre is there, and she can light the fire, but she can only do it if she walks incredibly slowly towards the trench. Never mind that people are dying and that the undead will overwhelm the Unsullied at any moment. Melisandre is a girl who likes to take her time. In fact, earlier she set thousands of Dothraki arrows on fire without touching them, but now she needs to make direct contact to light a twig. What are the rules here?
What are the rules?
The fire trench manages to hold off the undead for a moment, and the North uses this precious time to do precisely nothing. You'd think they'd use this moment of immobility on the undead's part to start firing arrows at them, but no, they just kind of wait for the undead to figure out how to get over the fire. Maybe they were hoping the undead might just call it a day and surrender. Undeterred, the undead just drop into the fire until the path is made, and they continue assaulting Winterfell. In the Godswood, Bran decides to start warging, and I thought this was going to pay off in some way, like he might manage to warg into a dragon or something, but ultimately he did absolutely nothing. As far as I can tell, he just warged into some ravens so he could watch the battle. Great use of your powers there, Bran. We cut back to Jon and Dany, who were suddenly attacked by the Night King on his dragon. Now, these scenes looked incredible and reminded me of scenes I'd imagined when reading about the Dance of Dragons, when the Targaryens and their dragons went to war with each other. But again, it makes no sense story-wise. The Night King knows that if he dies, his army dies, and it was stated in the previous episode that Bran would be used as bait to lure the Night King out so they could kill him. Well, apparently the Night King has no sense of self-preservation, as he chooses to single-handedly engage two dragons. One swipe from Longclaw, and Jon could have ended the battle there. Back in Winterfell, and the undead have breached the gate with the help of a giant. This giant was shown to be in the army of the undead last season, and I'm actually glad he wasn't forgotten about, but he gets no time to do anything before he's killed. A fan service scene plays out where a wounded Lyanna Mormont is picked up by the ice giant. For some reason, rather than just crushing her to death, the ice giant decides to bring her up close to his face, and she's able to stab and kill him with an obsidian dagger. Why did he bring her that close to his face? At first I thought he was trying to eat her, but the undead don't eat, so why would he have any inclination to do that? I don't really mind that Lyanna killed the giant. I expected her to do something in the battle, but did it have to be done in such a stupid way? A much better way for her to kill him would have been if the giant wounded her, but then didn't even bother finishing her off because he thinks she's so small and she's not a threat. Then just as he's about to knock over a tower full of men or something, Lyanna could have dragged herself after him and stabbed him in the back of the leg with the dragon glass. That took me about 8 seconds to come up with, and it's better than what we got. On the wall, the Hound is having a panic attack due to the amount of fire everywhere, which also happened during the Battle of the Blackwater. I like this callback, and I also like that the Hound seemed to be the only character who could see how utterly stupid the Norse plan of defence was, to the point where he knew it was just hopeless. Still, Beric points out that Arya's not giving up, and nor should they. Seeing Arya in trouble, the Hound's courage is restored, and he and Beric go to help her. This was a scene I actually quite liked. We then cut to a scene where a wounded Arya has to sneak through what appears to be the library of Winterfell past some wights. I quite like this scene as it gave us a breather from the over-the-top action and it felt really tense. Beric and the Hound are searching for her and arrive just in the nick of time as Arya is about to be overrun by the wights. Beric saves her by throwing his sword at a wight and holds them off long enough for the Hound to get away, though he is wounded. He manages to reach the room where Arya, the Hound and Melisandre are taking cover, but he succumbs to his wounds. This scene felt badly written for 2 reasons. One, Beric has been resurrected 9 times. Are you really telling me that his purpose was to throw a sword at a wight and hold them off for about 6 seconds while Arya ran away? Why did the Lord of Light require Beric to do that? Why couldn't it have been any other random soldier? Was it really so important that Beric be the one to do it that he was revived 9 times from death? Secondly, as he dies, a woman who has brought another back from the dead just watches. She doesn't even try to see if she can bring him back. The dude could create a flaming sword, and you don't think it would have been worth trying to bring him back. She had enough time to monologue to Arya about a prophecy, but not enough time to say a few words over Beric's corpse. We then have one of my least favourite parts of the episode where it's made clear Arya will kill the Night King. Melisandre reminds Arya that she told her she'd close brown eyes, green eyes, and blue eyes, apparently meaning White Walkers. This is actually a misquote from what Melisandre actually says. In the original episode, she says,
I see a darkness in you. And in that darkness, eyes staring back at me. Brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes. Eyes you'll shut forever.
I do not believe for a second that, when this scene was written, David and Dan meant it mean anything other than Arya would become a faceless assassin. In fact, you can see interviews where David and Dan decided Arya would kill the Night King as it was just unexpected, not because they'd laid any kind of groundwork for it to happen. Anyway, to hell with good writing and logic, because this is all Arya needs to suddenly get her mojo back and return to killing wights like it's nothing, even though she still has a massive head wound. We cut back to outside where all hell is breaking loose, and we see this shot of the Night King totally obliterate a large part of Winterfell with his dragon's fire. If his dragon's fire could do that, why didn't he do it right at the start of the battle? Also, why is no one trying to bring down the Night King's dragon? They literally just need one dragon glass arrow to pierce it and it's dead. Sure, a moving target is hard for an archer to hit, but why don't they just fire a volley as it passes over? Dany even got Drogon hit by a ballista. She knows how effective they are against dragons. Why didn't she suggest a few of those to be built? The Night King continues to battle Jon and Dany. He forces Jon's dragon to crash land, and despite apparently being fine, the dragon just pisses off somewhere and leaves Jon on foot. Dany sees an opportunity to talk to the Night King after he falls off his dragon, and delivers a full blast of fire to his face. The fire clears and the Night King remains untouched. We get absolutely no explanation as to why dragonfire wouldn't kill a White Walker. Surely dragonfire is one of the few things that should be lethal. Both dragon glass and Valyrian steel kill White Walkers because they're connected to dragonfire, and yet dragonfire itself doesn't do the trick. Really? Jon tries to chase down the Night King, but he responds by raising up the dead. This moment looked really cool, but you have to wonder why he left it this late to do it. He certainly has the sense of drama, that Night King. Down in the crypts, we get the plot twist everyone saw coming. Surprise, surprise, the crypt is full of dead people. I've not been that shocked since I went to a crack den and discovered everyone was high. The crypt seemed like such an obviously unsafe place to go that I assumed the characters knew something we didn't, like Jon was going to reveal the magic there was too strong for the Night King to overcome. But no, turns out the plan was just painfully done. I'm honestly beginning to wonder if there's some kind of gas leak at Winterfell that's turning anyone who stays there too long into a moron. Also, can we touch on the fact that the bones of the undead were able to smash through several inches of stone slabs? Stop this video right now, go to your nearest graveyard and punch a gravestone. Right, done? Now tell me which broke first, the stone or your hand? As if this wasn't tedious enough, we see most of the men and women and children being slaughtered, but all our main characters like Tyrion and Varys are fine because they're huddled behind a grave. It was almost comical. There's a line where Sansa tells Tyrion he was the best suitor she ever had, which is really faint praise when you remember that her other suitors were Joffrey and Ramsay. Just as Jon is about to be overrun by Whites, Dany swoops in on Drogon and lays down some cover fire. For some baffling reason, Dany decides to keep Drogon grounded and is, for some reason, surprised when Whites begin swarming him. Drogon flies off, but Dany falls and lands in the middle of the battlefield without her dragon or a weapon, and is totally surrounded. In the old days of Game of Thrones, this would spell her doom, but plot armour is thicker than ever at this point, and Jorah arrives in the nick of time to defend her from the Whites. Jorah is killed defending her, but manages to hold them off long enough for Arya to kill the Night King and for the battle to be won. It was really sad to see him go. He's a character I've enjoyed since season 1, and I think Ian Glenn did an amazing job with him. Well done, sir. Well done. We then see Jon trying to take out the undead dragon, but having a tough time of it. Earlier in the episode, the Ice Dragon's breath was enough to obliterate a section of Winterfell, yet here Jon is able to take cover behind some rocks and be fine. I ask again, what are the rules?
What are the rules?
I thought maybe Jon was going to get an awesome scene where he slays the Ice Dragon, but no, the fight culminates in Jon standing in front of it and screaming like a toddler having a tantrum. Really? We then cut back to the Godswood where the battle is about to wrap up. Theon and his men have managed to hold the Whites back, but soon they're surrounded and the Night King and his White Walker buddies appear. Bran turns to Theon and tells him he's a good man. Theon then charges into the Night King and is promptly killed. I see what they were going for here, but it felt so flat. Bran telling Theon he's a good man obviously means redemption in Theon's eyes, but the way he then just threw his life away seemed pointless. The way Bran says it was almost like he may as well have said, "Okay, Theon, I forgive you, you can die now." As you know, I've been a big fan of Theon as a character and his redemption arc, but I found his final moments to be far less impactful than what I was hoping for. The Night King slowly walks up to Bran and they stare at each other. I was expecting something to happen here, some kind of reveal, some kind of insight into the Night King's motivation, but we get nothing. Instead, Arya literally appears from nowhere to stab the Night King in the stomach. Now hold the fucking phone here. Early in the episode we saw that the Whites could sense the dripping of Arya's blood on the floor, yet somehow we're supposed to believe that an entire group of Whites and White Walkers were unable to sense Arya running through them to kill the Night King. Really? Really? Don't worry, I'm just getting started. So Arya, a character whose entire journey has been nothing to do with the threat of the White Walkers, gets to shank the Night King. Jon has been built up as the main opponent of the Night King since at least Hardhome, and yet he's busy shouting at a dragon when the Night King is killed. Here's a way to make that scene way better that took me about 8 seconds to come up with. What if Jon fights the Night King but it's clear he's outmatched? Seeing this, Arya races to help Jon. Jon sees Arya and realises he just needs to stall the Night King rather than kill him. Jon is disarmed and, just as the Night King is about to deliver the killing blow, Arya kills the Night King. Bam! Isn't that way more satisfying? Now let's talk about the fact the Night King and the White Walkers have been defeated. So that's it then. 8 seasons of build up to these bad guys and they're toast in one battle. I feel like Game of Thrones' main point has been about how petty all the politics and noble houses infighting is in the face of the White Walker threat, and yet all of that seems to be worth nothing and we're back to just caring about who sits on a chair. I used to think Cersei was dumb for caring more about the Iron Throne than the White Walkers, but it seems she was totally right. Honestly, I hope she wins now. Who cares about the White Walkers? They were pushovers beaten in one night. Seriously, as far as villains go, they're less of a danger to the great houses than the Freys, the Boltons or the Lannisters. Game of Thrones is all about morality and shades of grey, and I didn't think the White Walkers were just cartoony villains that wanted to destroy mankind just because, but it turns out that's exactly what they were. I feel like there was so much potential for a character like the Night King, but he just got killed off before the climax. It's like when Snoke was built up in The Force Awakens and then got killed off without explanation in The Last Jedi. Why did the White Walkers want to take over Westeros? What awoke them after all this time? What was their endgame plan? We know almost as much about them as we did at the end of Episode 1, Season 1. The episode ends with Melisandre leaving Winterfell, taking off her necklace and finally succumbing to her old age. It was a nicely shot scene, but it was again ruined by the fact that it made no sense. They seem to imply the necklace gave her the illusion of being young, and yet we've seen her in a previous episode without the necklace, and she was still hot looking. I could understand that maybe using that magic in the battle may have taken its toll, but why include the shot of her taking off the necklace? That implies it's the source of his power, which is a continuity error. How is it I'm more aware of these errors than the writers who literally get paid to notice these things? So David and Dan have decided that after all this, Game of Thrones is actually about who gets to sit on the Iron Throne, and the teaser trailer for the next episode sees Dany saying this dumb line.
We have won the Great War. Now we will win the last war.
So I guess this season will end with Dany fighting Cersei. Can you imagine if you were a soldier in the north and you'd somehow survived the long night and then you were asked to go risk your life again just so some twat can sit on an iron throne? Fuck that. There's no way any of the men in the north should agree to go, but of course they will because that's what the writing will dictate. Also, how much of a threat is Dany to Cersei at this point? The long night made it clear that a huge chunk of the living forces were killed. By the end, only the main characters seemed to be left standing, protected as they were by their plot armour. Dany's forces, including the Northmen, should be at least half after the long night, and that's being generous. Dany should be in no position to attack King's Landing, especially now winter's come. Yes, she still has 2 dragons, but we've seen that dragons are far from invincible, and given that King's Landing has ballistas and plenty of archers, Dany's dragons would be seriously at risk. Cersei also has the Golden Company and the Ironborn fleet on her side, plus the Lannister and King's Landing forces. She's really sitting pretty here, and I would be pissed off if Dany is presented in the war to not be on the back foot. My expectations for the writing has become so low that I really would be surprised if Dany still has a great army to challenge Cersei come the next episode. I was so looking forward to this episode, and I hate that I feel so negatively towards it. I know that when something's popular it becomes cool to shit on it, but I promise I take no pleasure in doing that here. I wanted to love this episode, but the truth is that it's probably my least favourite episode of Game of Thrones so far. There have been moments of poor writing in past episodes, from the Dawn storyline to the Ice Bear, but I think what makes the episode so hard to swallow is the fact that, unlike in other episodes, it never cuts away to another part of the story where the writing's stronger. We just had 80 minutes set in the same place with one poorly written scene after another. I think I can best sum this episode up by saying it felt like fan fiction, and mediocre fan fiction at that. I lost count of the amount of times a character would be seen being overwhelmed by the undead, only for another character to cut away the whites and save them. You can use that trick once or twice, but not repeatedly. As I said at the beginning of the video, I believe a lot of hard work went into shooting this episode, but the foundations of shoddy writing and poor lighting meant the finished result was thoroughly subpar. I'll finish this video off with a quote Maisie Williams said in an interview with Entertainment Weekly. It reads, "Speaking to Entertainment Weekly, Maisie Williams explained that she didn't know it was her character, Arya Stark, who was going to kill the Night King until the table read. Also, because she was in the dark about it until then, everyone acted weird towards her. However, when she finally read it for the first time, she was conflicted. It was so unbelievably exciting," Williams told EW, "but I immediately thought that everybody would hate it, that Arya doesn't deserve it. The hardest thing in any series, when you build up a villain that's so impossible to defeat, and then you defeat them, it has to be intelligently done, because otherwise people are like, well, the villain couldn't have been that bad, when some 45-kilogram girl comes in and stabs him. You gotta make it cool. And then I told my boyfriend, and he was like, should have been Jon though really, shouldn't it?" She's absolutely right. Look, I really hope the next 3 episodes add more context to all this, and give us a great ending to an epic season. But I really feel like the writers dropped the ball here, and I'm seriously concerned they're not going to be able to get things back on track in 3 episodes. It's been such a long and mostly great journey, I will be gutted if they screw it up with just hours left to go. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. That really helps my channel to grow. Please let me know what you thought of the episode. I'm eager to discuss it. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe. I put out at least 1 video a week and cover everything from video games to films to books. See you next time.